You're talking about 11-year period, and Chief Goodenough was in charge for 18 months.
Correct. But there were still missing records within that time period.
They also said in connection with exhibit number 5 that you found documents that were in odd locations throughout the city, but then you just talked about building inspection documents. Did you only find building inspection documents in odd locations?
No.
What other kinds of documents did you find in odd locations?
There were some public work documents in the salt garage.
Public works documents?
Correct.
Now, what period of time did these public works documents concern that you found in odd locations?
Roughly 1999 to 2000, probably for about 2 or 3 years.
And did you know whose responsibility that was to maintain those records? Would that also fall under the clerk's department?
They would if they had been provided to the clerk's office.
And do you know whether or not they were? That maybe somebody in the clerk's office put them? Are you saying that you know that those odd documents or odd locations somehow occurred? They got in those locations between 1999 and 2000,
No,
as opposed to some other time?
No, the records that were found dated from that time period.
Right, but you don't know when they were put in those locations.
I do not.
And has there been a public works official in recent years?
There has been.
And who is that?
Mr. Derek Yelton.
Do you know whether any investigation was done of Mr. Derek Yelton with respect to whether he properly maintained documents from the Public Works Department?
I am not aware.
How old is Derek Yelton?
I have no idea.
Do you know how long he's been with the city?
Probably about 25 years.
Were there any other documents found in odd locations other than the ones from 1999 and 2000 from Public Works?
Not that I found.
Now, you found some documents from the police department in odd locations?
I did find those. Testified to that.
And what period of time were those from?
2009, 2010.
And who put those there?
I don't know.
You have no idea, right? They could have been done by somebody in the police department. They could have been done by somebody in the clerk's office. They could have been done by the mayor. Who knows who moved them, right?
No idea.
Okay.
I just found them in this list.
Now, documents are stored someplace in the clerk's office?
There is a records room in the administration building that holds mostly our permanent records. There are payroll records in the administration assistant's office. There are personnel records in the clerk's office and in the mayor's office. There are legislative records in the clerk's office.
And what's the records retention policy? How many years are you supposed to keep records?
It varies depending on the record series. There's probably about a 125-page document that the Department of Library and Archives puts out that lists the various records by series and type and how long you should keep each of them.
And was there ever a space issue with respect to these records? In other words, was there ever an issue where it was determined that you just didn't have enough space to hold all the records that were required to be kept?
Not privy or aware to any discussions along those lines.
Not during your tenure, anyway.
No, nothing.
Now, you also talked about that March 20th, 2013 council meeting.
Yes.
In which you say you were present and you observed the mayor ask Chief Goodenough to remove a woman from the audience?
Correct.
Now, isn't it correct, sir, that what you observed was Chief Goodenough went up, whispered in the woman's ear, and that appeared to take care of the problem?
I witnessed the mayor give Chief Goodenough a directive to remove an individual from a meeting who had been disrupted.
And isn't it correct, sir, that Chief Goodenough, prior to receiving that directive, had been out of the room dealing with another issue and had not seen whatever disturbance mayor was referring to?
He was out of the room. I do not know what he was doing out of the room.
Okay, but he wasn't present during the alleged disturbance that the mayor was concerned with.
Correct.
And whatever he did in the performance of his duties as a police officer and talking to this woman seemed to solve the issue. Isn't that correct? There were no further disturbances from the woman?
There were no further disturbances.
From your perception, did you perceive that the mayor wanted this woman arrested?
No. The order that was given was to remove the individual from the meeting.
It's a public meeting, correct?
So, yes, it's a public meeting, but the mayor also presides at the public meeting. And I have been at other public meetings where individuals have been removed in the course of my career. And typically what happens is an individual is escorted out of the building and basically told to go home.
Okay, and they've been escorted out of the building by whom during your tenure?
Police officers.
And so they've been asked to be removed in the last, what, how long have you been there, about a year?
Well, yeah, here a year. However, this is not the only job in government I've ever had. And over the past 15 years, I have seen individuals removed from public meetings.
Right, the purpose of removing them is to stop whatever disturbance is going on.
Correct.
And in this particular case, the disturbance stopped.
This time.
Yep. Okay.
However, the chief still did not obey the mayor's order.
Did you observe the mayor yelling at the citizens during that meeting at which there was some sort of disruption?
I observed the mayor attempting to regain control of a meeting where there was a deliberate attempt to disrupt the meeting.
And did the mayor attempt to regain control by shouting at the citizens?
Shouting over the citizens so he could be heard.
And who hired you, the mayor?
Yes. I am, all city employees are appointed by the mayor, and as an officer of the city, my particular position also has approval of council. So I was selected by the mayor, and council approved my appointment.
Right. And you realize you've been asked to appear tonight by the mayor.
Objection. He's been asked to appear by me, not by the mayor.
You've been asked to appear here by the city for which you work.
Yeah, I'm the
You
record
understand,
custodian.
and you understand that the city wishes for you to testify in the city's behalf.
I am the records custodian, and it was my understanding that I am here to testify to the records that are contained within the city, and simply note the records that we have, or
Okay.
don't have.
Okay, so let's take these real quickly. With respect to the missing documents, you don't know whether Chief Goodenough is responsible for any of the missing documents, is that correct?
I would say that the documents that were not retained during the time period which he was in charge of it would have fallen under his responsibility.
Well, but they're missing, and you know the mayor's been reprimanded for removal or destruction of documents. So how can you, are you suggesting to this council that you think Chief Goodenough is responsible for removing those documents?
It's not my call to judge and weigh that evidence.
Okay, so you don't, yeah, so you're not putting it Chief Goodenough, you don't know who is responsible for those missing documents. Isn't that correct?
I know they're missing.
Yeah, you know they're missing. And they could have been missing as a result of some action by somebody in the clerk's office, by some action, somebody in the police department, and by some action by someone in the mayor's office. Isn't that correct?
Objection. Calls for speculation. Said he doesn't know.
Okay, you don't know who is responsible for the missing documents, correct?
I know that these documents are supposed to be in the records of the city.
And with respect to the failures with respect to overtime, you can identify 14 hours that were mistakenly paid?
Objection. We've
fine.
already had testimony on all these
I'm just
issues.
trying to sum this up.
I can find 14 hours that were were duplicated on
Since,
2 different timesheets.
since January of on 2 different time sheets, so 2 time sheets were in error?
Well, rephrase that, on 2 sets of timesheets, those 2 sets of timesheets being one, the single 13-month back pay request that was made on 11/29, or 12/29 of 11, and the bi-weekly timesheets that were submitted every 2 weeks by the same employee for that year and a half.
For a total of how many hours?
14 and a half
14 minutes.
net.
So there's missing documents, there's 14 half hours of overtime, you would say improperly paid, and what else? To support the removal of the chief?
All I'm doing is testifying to the documents that are here.
I know. I'm just trying to summarize this. There's missing documents, we don't know who caused them. We know there's 14 half hours that were improperly paid. And what else do you think is
Well, you've asked me questions about I've been asked questions about whether or not the chief follows the mayor's directives when given.
Okay.
And I have witnessed that that is not to be the case.
And you're familiar with the personnel policy, right?
Correct.
You were familiar with the first personnel policy that existed between 2002 and 2013, right? And then it was revised in late 2013.
I read over it, yes.
And under the previous personnel policy, if someone was insubordinate, let's just take an example. If someone was insubordinate in March of 2013 and they were a city employee, who would be responsible for disciplining that person, their immediate supervisor?
In March of, well,
For example, in March of 2013, who did the chief report to?
the mayor.
Now, who would be responsible for disciplining Chief Goodenough in March of 2013 for anything he did improper in March of 2013 under the former personnel policy?
Well, that would have been handled under the city's civil service ordinance.
Civil Service Commission would have disciplined him?
No, not.
The mayor would have disciplined him, right? And then it would have gone to civil service. Isn't that correct?
Yeah. I don't have those documents from me, so.
Do you have any record, have you ever seen any record of discipline given to Chief Goodenough for this alleged incident in March of 2013?
No.
Do you know that the city personnel policies that existed at that time required what is called progressive discipline?
I don't recall that it says it required it.
Do you recall that the city had a practice and policy of issuing progressive discipline to its employees?
Having only been here a couple months, I would not have been familiar with the disciplinary practices at the time.
Okay, how about in May of 2013? Did you become more familiar with the disciplinary policy, practices and policies?
Still only here a couple of months here.
Do you have subordinates?
I do.
You read the personnel policy manual because you have subordinates.
I do.
Are you aware of any discipline given to the chief as a result of this alleged incident in May of 2013? Until the suggestion of his removal this month, 10 months later?
I am not.
Okay. And you testified about another incident in October of 2013, I believe?
Okay, October, yes.
Are you aware, in your review of records, of any discipline of the chief for whatever occurred in October of 2013?
There was a letter placed in his file as a result of a refusal to follow a mayor's directive.
And did the mayor submit that letter to the file? Did the mayor write out like a warning to Chief Goodenough and say, Chief, here, sign this, and we'll put it in your file?
I do not believe that letter came from the mayor.
It didn't come from the mayor. Who did it come from?
City attorney.
Is the city attorney Chief Goodenough's boss, to your knowledge?
No.
Did the city attorney ever indicate to you whether the mayor even spoke to Chief Goodenough about this discipline?
I have no information.
All you got was a request to put something in his file.
Correct.
Was Chief Goodenough asked to sign that document that was being placed in his file?
I don't recall.
And do you recall whether it was a written reprimand, a suspension?
I think it was just a letter.
Just a letter? Okay. Are you aware of any other discipline in his file other than this just a letter that was placed in there by Mr. McMurtry in October of 2013?
The records I have access to do not indicate that. I do not have access to all of the records on the chief's career.
Aren't you the custodian of his personnel file?
I'm the custodian of city records, however, I do not have all the records on all employees. There are desk copies for all officers in the police department that are kept in the chief's office, and I do not have access to them.
Does the mayor keep a desk file separate and apart from the personnel file and the chief of police?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is the only personnel file regarding the chief of police maintained in your office?
I don't know, because the former chief, before Chief Goodenough, Corky Brown, probably kept a desk copy of a file on then Lieutenant Goodenough, and I do not have access to that document. It's locked behind a door. I can't get access to it.
Locked behind a door in your office?
No, locked behind Chief Goodenough's office door.
And the mayor's now his boss. Does the mayor ever try to retrieve that desk file maintained by the former mayor or the chief?
I have no knowledge of that.
Okay. But you've reviewed the personnel file of Chief Goodenough that's under your custody and control?
Correct.
And the only discipline, if we can call it that, is a single letter from Mr. McMurtry, the city attorney, addressed to Chief Goodenough. That's the only document you see in the documents under your custody and control that is critical of his performance prior to this suggestion of removal.
Correct.
Did you meet with the auditor when the auditor received these records? To explain them, do anything like that?
No. It was all done by phone and email.
Oh, so you had a telephone conversation with him.
Very brief.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Bowman. That's all the questions we have.
I think at this point, I'm going to ask if any of the council people have questions. Mr. Bowman? And just with the procedure that we talked about previously was in order to get the questions on camera, you'll state the question, I'll repeat it, and then we can go from there.
Right, I'd like Mr. Bowman to tell who requested this audit report, if he knows who requested the audit report.
So the question is, do you know who requested the auditor's report?
All I know is that on the second day I was employed, we received a letter from Adam Edelin, the state auditor's office, stating that they wanted a certain set of payroll and timesheet records on a particular employee, and that letter referenced citizens' concerns that they had received, but it did not mention from whom they had received those concerns.
Thank you.
Is there a copy of that letter available for us to review, please, both pages?
Is there a copy of that letter?
It's in these exhibits.
Okay, let me finish my question. So is there a copy of that letter from the auditor available for review?
Yes.
And it's in the exhibits?
A copy of it is, I believe, one of the exhibits.
Is that in Exhibit 1, you think?
Are you talking about the auditor's letter or the complaining letter that initiated the audit?
The auditor's letter is found in Exhibit 1A.
Is there a copy of the initiating letter from the auditor to the city?
I'm sorry, I misspoke. That is the report from the auditor's office. There is a copy of the letter that was received from the auditor's office dated April 15th in the city records.
Is it contained within the exhibits we've?
After reviewing this tab, I do not believe so.
We'd like to make a request on behalf of Chief Goodenough for a copy of that complaining letter.
It's the letter from the state auditor, it's not the letter from whoever issued the complaint.
Well, that's what we're trying to
That's what
figure
I
out
asked for.
here.
That's specifically what I asked for.
Yeah, I don't think that the city has that. I don't think the
It was shown to me by the mayor on or about April 26th when he informed me about the audit, so it does exist. I'd like to see it.
Okay, so we're talking about the letter from the auditor to the city?
Yes.
Okay.
Ma'am.
Nobody knows anything about the initiating complaint from a citizen, that's within the auditor's office, but the letter from the auditor to the city
Yes,
does
ma'am.
exist. Cambridge. Any other questions? Yes.
Mr. Bowman, are you aware that Chief Goodenough got paid extra to oversee the shipsman inspection services other than his police chief pay?
Let me repeat the question again for the record. Was that the complete question? Okay. Are you aware that the chief was paid extra for his responsibilities in overseeing the building inspection and zoning?
Yes, city records indicate that in December of 2010, the previous mayor provided approximately $1.50 an hour raise to the chief. And I believe that was in part due to the addition of building and zoning to the police department as a result of Executive Order 2010-1.
Any other questions from the council?
Yes. I believe Mr. Bowman indicated that he believes that that $1.50 raise was maybe in part to the additional duties. Is there a record indicating that that is the case, not just an annual increase or a merit increase?
Do you know if the $1.50 per hour increase was due to the additional responsibilities? Is that the question?
In the city records, there is an email from the former mayor to the administration assistant simply raising the pay rate of Chief Goodenough by $1.50 and another employee by $10, and it was not a part of the annual pay increase. It was a separate one-time just for those two employees.
I'm going to do my own follow-up. Was there any explanation of those raises in the records that you saw?
No.
Any other questions from council?
Who sets the pay rates? There was an indication that the chief had approved timesheets that maybe were overpaid because they were in the wrong category. Who sets the pay rates for the employees?
So the question is, who sets the pay rates for employees?
At the time in question, the pay ranges were set by council as a part of ordinance 2010-8. And so the classification and the pay ranges for all city employees were set by ordinance in December of 2010.
Was that due to civil service being
Yes.
inactive? And in civil service, as I believe, they have categories like chief, police chief 1, assistant chief, detective, and then they give a dollar amount, specialist on down.
Correct. The exhibit to ordinance 2010-8, which sets the pay and classification for civil service employees, contains a title, number of people in that position, and the pay range for that position.
And we have, do you recall, I remember seeing it, I can't remember, do you recall, was there a number for assistant chief?
There was.
And was there a number for detective?
Well, there's a number assigned to each. The number assigned to assistant chief was 1. The number assigned to detective was 0.
Okay, but we have no documentation showing that he was promoted to assistant chief.
That's correct.
Okay, so council approved, former council, former council approved that pay scale and that number, but there was no documentation to show that this individual went from detective to assistant chief. There's no documentation anywhere that we can find.
There's no documentation that I can find within city records that indicates any person in the executive branch authorized that promotion.
Okay.
Can I follow up? I want to know specifically who sets pay for individual employees. I don't care about the pay range. I want to know who sets the pay rate for one employee.
That would be the mayor.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council?
In addition to the reprimand provided to the mayor by a unanimous reprimand in May of 2012, I believe that's that. Was there any other direction provided to the city by the circuit court regarding destruction of documents?
do you know if there was any other direction from the circuit court regarding destruction of documents in addition to the reprimand that was given?
It is my understanding that there was an order that was relayed to employees by the then city attorney that stated that all records destruction would cease, and until it had been reestablished, and regular records retention and destruction per the record retention schedule was not restarted until until probably this past November or December.
Is that your question? Any
I
other
have one
questions?
more.
Okay.
When did the city's offices start to look for this ordinance that would help clarify if this former employee was an assistant chief versus a detective?
I'm going to rephrase that for the television folks. When did the city begin to look for the ordinance that would have clarified the difference between assistant chief and detective? Is that fair?
When the auditor's office asked for all the pay records and timesheets for an individual employee to conduct their investigation, showing promotions was a part of that record gathering. So the search for that promotion occurred at the same time that we were compiling those records for the auditor's office per their request.
Okay, can I go back to this payroll thing that Jimmy asked? Because we as a council just recently passed an ordinance for pay raises for non-civil service employees. So, did I understand you that the mayor sets the pay scale? Is that what you asked, Jim? Who sets the
Specific-
pay scale?
Specific pay for specific employee.
Right, but as long as it's within that range of what council approves? Because don't we approve the range of salary, and then the mayor can go within that range or not?
State statute requires all cities to have a pay and classification plan. The pay and classification plan that the city of Villa Hills has is a pay range set up where you have a minimum and maximum pay rate per employee position, and it is up to the mayor to select the actual rate of pay for the individual employee within that range.
I'm afraid to ask. Any other questions from council? Okay. Don't you, can you do your?
Sure, thank you. I just have a few questions. Mr. Berman, I just want to clarify, you were talking about a time period that the executive order 2010-1 was in effect. And if you testified, you said it was from December 2010 to May 2011. Is that correct? Or was
2012.
Okay, so that executive order was in effect because this particular person, the building inspector, was working for the city, doing building inspections as a city employee. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that relationship of the building inspections being done by a city employee spanned from, well, at least pursuant to the executive order, spanned from December 2010 through till May of 2012, correct?
To the end of May of 2012, yes.
And just for everybody's knowledge, why did that change? What changed about the relationship of the building inspector to the city?
In May of 2012, the mayor signed a executive order flipping the building and zoning responsibilities back to an outside contractual firm called Schutzman Inspection Services.
Now, Mr. Freaking spent a lot of time asking you about approximately how many hours Mr. Schutzman worked when he submitted that one overtime request for that 13-month period. Do you know how many hours of overtime he asked for during that one request?
That single request was 1,275 hours.
Okay, and how many hours, if you know from your review of the records, how many hours did he work, how many normal hours did he work during that same period?
Over 2,000, I would say probably, 2,000 regular hours, and then he would have had overtime hours in the police department as well. So I would probably say 2,100 additional hours.
2,100 plus another 1,000?
Yes.
So 3,100 hours in that 13-month period?
That is what the employee claimed on payroll reports and records.
Now, you also testified, and I just want to be clear about these facts, when that 1,000 hours of overtime totaling $86,000 in total compensation due for 13 months was presented to the chief, do you know from reviewing the records how long it took the chief to approve that?
The letter from the chief to the mayor saying that he had received this and was passing it along was the same day.
Okay. Did the chief sign the documents approving that overtime?
He did submit approval.
So he approved an $86,000 expenditure within 1 day?
Records indicate that, yes.
Okay, and are these the same records that the auditor criticized in the auditor's report?
I believe so.
Now, did you, in your review of the records, encounter any record, any minute, any recording, anything that would indicate that members of council were aware during that period where we had the 13 months and 1,000 hours of overtime accrued? Did you see any records of the city that would indicate that the then council, not this council, but the council that was in place then, was aware that Detective Schutzman was racking up 1,000, or that the building inspector was racking up 1,000 hours of overtime?
Not in the search that I did.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Freaking also asked you about, criticized your failure to detail what you were doing for your hours, and you tried to explain that. In your view, is there anything improper under the city's policies with the way you submit your hours for the hours that you work in your job?
No, I submit my hours per the form that were provided.
Okay, and when you criticized the building inspector and the police chief, the forms that they used and approved, why did you do that? Not when you criticized, but when you noted the deficiencies.
When I noticed the difference with the access reports do not, the access reports that are provided as a part of the payroll do not list the hours worked. They only list total number of they don't list the start and stop times. They only list the hours worked as one part. And then the other issue is that in the 13-month single overtime request that went back for 13 months, the amount of additional detail that was provided as a part of that report leads to other documents that should be there supporting those that request, emails, inspection reports, permits, that simply are not in the record of the city.
Now, later in the cross-examination, there was discussion about whether or not the chief was present at the time that there was disruption in this March 2013, if I remember the date right, meeting. March 20, 2013 meeting. I just want to get the facts clear. Was the chief present during the period when the disruption occurred?
Not that I saw.
Okay. You said you've been in government, working in government for 15 years, correct?
Correct.
Is there normally some type of law enforcement officer present during a public meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And why, in your experience, in 15 years, is a law enforcement officer normally present during a public hearing, a public meeting?
To assist the provider in maintaining order.
Now, there was also a discussion, Mr. Freaking tried to characterize the city's employment manuals as requiring progressive discipline. Are you aware of a requirement in any city employee manual that requires progressive discipline?
Not off the top of my head.
Now, in the current city manual, you